Hello and welcome to the programme. Tonight, who gets the child? That's the issue we're grappling with in this edition of Let's Talk. As more and more marriages break up, the question of which parent gets custody of the children is becoming increasingly contentious. Thousands of women are bringing up families on their own, and thousands of men say the legal system is loaded against them. The courts say they place the interests of the child first. But is a system which sets parent against parent the best way to deal with such emotionally charged issues? On top of that, more and more Northern Irish people, mainly women, estranged from foreign partners, say they're being snared in an international legal web. They're being charged with abduction if they return home and forced to go abroad again if they want to see their children. It's an issue which BBC Northern Ireland's Spotlight programme focused on this week with a special report on the case of Derry woman Cara Gunn, who's fighting for custody of her young son in Florida. Reporter Kevin McGee reminds us of the facts of Gunn versus Gunn.
Hello.
May I get you something to eat or drink?
We'd love a drink, please.
Sure.
This is Cara Gunn and her son Dylan. Last year, when her marriage reached breaking point, she took her 5-year-old back to Derry without telling her husband she was leaving America. Under an international treaty known as the Hague Convention, she was ordered by a Belfast court to return to Florida to fight for custody of her son.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. All rise.
Because of the way she upped and left, she's been portrayed in court as an untrustworthy mother who would not honour any visitation or access granted to her former husband.
What kind of relationship did you have with Dylan at that time?
We had a great relationship. I mean, Dylan and I were like, perfect people. I mean, it's unbelievable the closeness that Dylan and I had together.
Do you believe that if custody went the other way and the mom was given primary residence, do you think you would see Dylan?
No, I do not.
Still there, so it's obviously not a man.
For Cara Gunn, there's an added complication. She's banned from entering the US for 10 years and was given special permission to return to Florida for the hearing. If she loses, she'll have to return to Northern Ireland without her son. In court, her ex-husband denied he was abusive to her. She defended her decision to take Dylan back to Derry.
There was quite a few reasons why I didn't come back. I had called Bobby when I arrived and told him where me and the kids were, and I told him that we had a return trip ticket. He started yelling on the phone and told me that I had really effed up. And he started calling my friends and telling them that they were accessory to kidnapping and that he was going to have me thrown in jail. And I had got phone calls from friends that had told me he had moved another lady into my home. There was nothing left to return to.
You're doing a pretty good job.
Before returning to Florida with her mother for the hearing, Dylan was attending primary school in Derry.
Is that because
He's doing fantastic. He's loving every minute of it, I think. He's loving school. My brother's child is in the same class as him in school, and they're just like best buddies. They love it. He's adjusting well into school. He loves his teacher, and he's been pupil of the week twice in his first year of school.
In court, the political situation in Northern Ireland was mentioned time and time again.
There could be problems as far as persecution when he's growing up. I see that as one of his major problems because the safety on that aspect alone, the Catholics and the Protestants are continually fighting over there.
I've got a bunch of articles here I want to share with you. This first one shows a picture of children playing. In the background, looks like a wall with graffiti and barbed wire. Does that look like a typical playground in Northern Ireland?
I don't believe so. I've never seen a playground like that.
If the decision goes against Cara Gunn, it'll also mean Dylan will be split up from his half-sister Laura. Florida Circuit Court Judge Garvin D. Angel is expected to announce the verdict within days.
Kevin McGee reporting. Well, earlier this afternoon I spoke to Cara on the telephone to Florida and I asked her how she's coping with the wait for the judge's ruling.
At the minute I feel like my whole insides are just inside out, to be honest. It's like I'm leaving here next Friday and we still don't know what's happening, so the nerves are like really starting to kick in now. I think for the first time I'm actually thinking about the whole closure of everything, you know, because once I leave next Friday, that's it. It's done. It's over with, and it's hard to think about where we're going to go after this. You know, it's just everything's been so tied up in it. But right now, I just, you know, every time the phone rings, I'm thinking, is that it? Is the verdict here? And it just, you know, it's hard to take at the minute. I think I'm just getting really stressed out waiting.
Are you confident, Cara, the decision will go your way?
I am pretty confident. You know, I'm thinking, you know, I really can't see how it can't go my way, but, you know, there's always these creeping doubts that keep coming in, you know. I keep thinking, well, what happens if it does go the other way, you know? How do I react? And I'm afraid that maybe I've got my hopes built up too much, you know, and I'm thinking, is it wishful thinking that it's going to go my way? Am I just not facing facts here, you know? Is there something that the judge is seeing that I'm not seeing? It's so hard to, it's really nobody can tell at this stage, but I do secretly feel confident, you know, that I'll be coming home with Dylan next Friday.
And have you allowed yourself to consider in detail what will happen if you do lose out and the verdict goes the wrong way from your point of view?
I've been trying to work out, you know, is there any way that possible that I could stay here? Because I really don't think that I can get on a plane and leave Dylan. You know, I don't think that I can come home if that's the case. And immigration have got my fingerprints. I can't hide, you know, and there's no way that I can even sneak and stay here. And even if I could, I can't get a work permit. I won't be able to work, you know. I won't be able to, there's no way I can maintain me and the kids. So I'm kind of secretly hoping if it's not this evening, it'll be tomorrow morning that we'll hear something, because, you know, I'd like to know before the weekend, because whoever has got to say goodbyes, you know, we need to have, you know, sufficient amount of time to try and explain to Dylan what's going on and what's going to happen. You know, he doesn't understand it right now. He doesn't know that we're going to leave next Friday, and he doesn't know that he's just going to be ripped apart all over again.
Cara Gunn speaking to me earlier today. Well, to throw some light onto the issues raised by the Cara Gunn case and others like it, I'm joined by our first two experts tonight. Dr. Susan Broe lectures in international law and human rights at Queen's University, Belfast. She worked as a lawyer in Canada for 18 years, specialising in family and children's law. And Angela Hegarty is a senior lecturer in law at the University of Ulster at Magee, where she specialises in public and human rights law. You're both very welcome to Let's Talk. Susan Broe, first of all, a word about the Hague Convention here. Let's just get this out of the way. It's the issue which is at the heart of the Cara Gunn case and other cases that we're going to refer to on the programme tonight. A quick little potted version of what it is, what the relevant part is of the convention.
Okay, the Hague Convention is one of a series of treaties on private international law. It's not a criminal convention. It's a civil convention on international child abduction. And what it does is that the countries that sign up to this treaty, and there are now 74 countries that have signed up to the treaty, agree that if a child is removed from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction that deprives a parent of custody or access rights, the child will be returned to the jurisdiction of the child's residence at the time the child was removed.
So Cara Gunn had to take her son Dylan back to the United States of America.
Exactly.
Now, the problem with it is that it's very straightforward, cut and dried, black and white as far as that's concerned, and once it is invoked, it has a huge impact on the custody issue, but not everybody thinks it's a good idea.
Right. I mean, once it is invoked, what it means is that there is a prejudice in some ways against the parent who has taken the child, because the treaty is called the Child Abduction Convention, and anyone looking at the film of Cara Gunn wouldn't see her as an abductor. And unfortunately, that's what the convention is called. I think in a way it's a misnomer, because what it's really trying to do is establish jurisdiction of which court should determine the custody and access situation. Yes, there are some cases where the child is abducted and disappeared, and it's a tragedy. In this case, we see from the film that Cara phoned her husband, but notwithstanding that, she didn't have a custody order. There had been no determination in a court, so therefore she put herself in rather a defensive position at that stage because she had taken the child from his home.
Okay, Angela Hegarty, do you see the Hague Convention as being prejudicial?
No, I think the Convention, like any other human rights treaty, for that's what it is fine in itself. But like any other human rights treaty, particularly one which is more than 20 years old, it needs to be reviewed constantly and amended in the light of experience and changing circumstances. Now, one of the problems with the Convention is that it doesn't take into account the reasons why women sometimes flee from intolerable situations. There's no defence under the Convention of domestic violence as being a valid reason for flight, nor does the Convention, when it's implemented, properly allow for the supervision of undertakings given by the other side, by the partner who's claiming to want the child back. There are undertakings given in lots of cases to the courts here which aren't enforced when the parent returns, and that's quite a big problem financially and emotionally.
Do you think then that courts looking at a case where the Hague Convention has been invoked need to interrogate the issue a little bit more carefully, that they need to perhaps take time to assess the broader picture rather than simply making an order which forces the errant parent to return to the other jurisdiction?
Well, the Convention's opposed to that. The Convention says basically this is a determination of which court should decide the custody issue. And once you take a child from a jurisdiction, no matter what the circumstances are, and there are very limited defences under the Convention, the Convention needs to take account, indeed in the last 20 years, of the growth of judicial understanding of the effects of domestic violence, not just on the person who's subjected to the domestic violence, but also to the children, the effect on the children. And the courts here, as they are instructed by the Hague Convention authorities, interpret those defences very narrowly, and that creates further problems.
Okay, Susan, we can't obviously second-guess the judge's verdict in the Cara gun case, and we wouldn't want to do that anyhow, but what's your assessment of the case? You've taken a close interest in it, and our Spotlight programme has highlighted a lot of the key issues in that. What's your reading of Cara Gunn's case?
Well, I tend to agree with Angela with respect to the situation of domestic violence, and I was frankly horrified at the trial. And I'm not casting aspersions on the conduct of the judges or of the lawyers, but the procedure followed in Florida is certainly not the procedure I'm familiar with, having practiced for 18 years in Canada. There should have been psychological assessments. There should have been an advocate for the child. Any argument, and again, that's one of the absences from the Hague Convention, is that you really need, even a young child needs an advocate. Even a young child should have an advocate in court. And that was absent from the Florida court, which would have never happened in my province of Ontario. It would not have happened. That child would have had an advocate because the attachment between that child and parents and siblings was extremely important.
Angela, would you share some of Susan's reservations?
She's echoing what I said. I think that's good to hear. The problem is that there's an inconsistency in the application of the Convention, because the Convention is not decided by some overarching body like the European Convention on Human Rights is determined largely by the court. There's no overarching court which determines how the Convention is applied, which means you do get those inconsistencies, although I'm not quite sure about your views about Canada in terms of how it would be applied. I know there are people here who've had experience of it.
Okay, we'll maybe come on to Canada and the States with our audience in a moment or two. I want to hear from members of the audience in a second. I'd just like to hear from Kevin McGee, first of all, who's the BBC Spotlight reporter who has made now 2 programmes on the Cara gun case. I spoke to Cara this afternoon, and we've heard a portion of that conversation. I know that you were speaking to the court authorities today. Is there any white smoke at all as to when we will hear this ruling, Kevin?
Not as yet, Mark. Now, just before we came on air, I had a conversation with the judge's assistant in Ocala, Florida. She said that there's a possibility that the result may be announced tomorrow. She explained that the judge, he has been very busy as of late, that this isn't the only case of this nature that he's been involved in, and she suggested that there's a possibility it might be tomorrow. If not tomorrow, possibly early next week. But Cara Gunn has to return to Northern Ireland by the 19th of December, and I understand her plane tickets are booked for the 12th, so it'll certainly be before then.
She said in her conversation with me that she is guardedly optimistic that the verdict will be in her favour. You spent a lot of time with her, you spent a lot of time in the courtroom. Just a quick upsum of your reading of her situation and how this might pan out for her.
I think it depends. It depends on what weight or emphasis the judge attaches to what was presented as evidence about Northern Ireland in court, but what we subsequently discovered was opinion, a lot of it. And I think it depends as to whether or not he thinks that that's important, or whether he looks more at really the parenting issues in the case.
Okay, Kevin, thanks very much indeed for that. I know you're keeping an eye on the case over the next few days on behalf of us all here. Can I just invite members of the audience now who might like to comment on the Cara gun case or discuss other similar experiences that they or members of their family have had? There's a lady just in the very back row there. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Our family went through a very similar situation 2 years ago when our daughter was forced to choose between going back to Italy with her children or letting the children go back with their father. And I was so grateful that Spotlight highlighted this issue because we believed, as I'm sure the Gunn family believed, that something like that could never happen to us. And when our daughter left Italy because her husband they were already separated, he wasn't paying the maintenance, she wasn't able to support herself and the children there, and on legal advice, she came to Northern Ireland. Her solicitor told her to leave Italy and come here with the children. But unfortunately, her lawyer was not a specialist in family law, nor did he know anything about the Hague Convention. And so she ended up in the High Court in Belfast, and the judge ordered the children to return to Italy. And so my advice to anyone who finds themselves in this situation now would be, for goodness sake, before you leave the country that you're in, get the advice, seek the advice, whatever the cost of an expert in family law, because it will cost you a lot more afterwards, and we certainly know that. Get good advice and find out if that country is one of the countries which has signed up to the Hague Convention. And above all, don't kid yourself that once you get here, a good lawyer will be able to arrange for you to stay here, because it's inevitable. The children will go back to the country of habitual residence.
Can I just ask you what impact that experience has had on your family circle?
Well, the impact on us directly has been an emotional and a financial impact, because obviously Angela Hegarty mentioned the fact that we have no way of imposing the undertakings that are made in the High Court here. Our son-in-law undertook to pay the rent for our daughter until the case was resolved in the Italian courts. When he went back to Italy, he didn't pay the rent, and she was evicted for non-payment of rent. I was there when the bailiffs arrived, and I can assure you it was not a pleasant experience. So it had that impact, the emotional impact on our daughter and other women in this situation, that if they have a nervous breakdown, which she was very close to having, they will lose custody of the child because they're an unfit parent. So there are all of those aspects. Also the fact that you just can do nothing. You feel so totally helpless. And all we can do, we can't change our daughter's situation now. So all I do is I fight to raise awareness of the fact so that other young people will not fall into the same trap. Because it is a fact that today our young people are traveling, or not so young people, they're traveling. They're meeting people from other cultures, or people from here are emigrating to work elsewhere. And it's a situation which can arise if the relationship breaks down and children are involved. We must know about the Hague Convention.
Okay, Hazel, thank you very much indeed for that. Ursula Sweeney has her hand up over on the left here, just in the middle of the second row from the back. Ursula, your daughter's experience mirrors in many ways the experience that Hazel Homeland has just explained about her families.
Yes. My granddaughter was sent back. My daughter had to follow. When she got there, her husband denied access to her home, so she had no money, she had nowhere to live. And my husband and I have had to keep her, and have been doing so for the past 2.5 years. He won't pay her maintenance, and at the moment she's not working. So it has a massive, massive effect on my entire family.
And that's with Canada. The first experience we've heard about was
her husband actually
Italy.
is deliberately dragging the legal procedure out. He dragged it out to cost us as much as possible till we ran out of money, which we have done.
And where do you stand then on the issue, the broader issue about the Hague Convention and what it's meant to do and what perhaps in practice it actually does?
Well, I think it's quite useful. But I do honestly believe with all my heart it needs to be reviewed and amended, and that women, there should be some provision for women when they land in these countries that they can have access to legal aid and the human right of somewhere to live and some money to live on.
Okay, Susan, I mean, not just because you've got the Canadian connection, but just pick up on what Ursula
Really
is saying.
surprised to hear about the maintenance, given that we boast about our maintenance enforcement system. So I'm horrified to hear that your daughter isn't getting maintenance. I wanted to just echo what you said about many lawyers not understanding and giving bad advice initially. And unfortunately, I have to also caution about some family law specialists. A number of family law specialists are not aware that the Hague Convention does not only include people who have custody orders. In other words, you can't leave even if you don't have custody. And many lawyers will tell their clients, well, just go. You don't have a custody order against you, so take your children and go before there's a custody order. And that is the very worst. It's almost negligent as far as I'm concerned. It's the worst advice they can give. But I also want to say that I do not agree with Angela. I do think there are provisions in the Hague Convention. And again, it's because lawyers are not familiar with the provisions. Article 13 talks about psychological damage to the child. Why isn't that evidence being led in Belfast? It should be. And I see you're nodding no, that it didn't work. I can understand that it's a very difficult onus, and I accept that it's a difficult onus. But on the other hand, there is a provision. I'm just not going to accept that the Hague Convention didn't acknowledge that. Other thing I want to say is, yes, I do agree that it is 20 years old now, and there has been discussion of amending it with respect to child's wishes and instructions and domestic violence. I think those are two provisions that need to be reviewed.
Angela?
Can I just come back? I mean, it's a very strict standard that the courts apply here in the UK and are also instructed to apply. It's very hard to prove psychological harm, and you know that from looking at the case law. There's a case, for example, where a woman was returned to Africa when her husband had murdered a man, believing that she'd be having an affair with him, but the children were still returned to that situation. Now, that's the kind of situation I think you've got to look at quite severely. And I don't accept your argument that there are sufficient defences and protections for children and for women in the Hague Convention. There simply aren't.
Okay, quite a few people wanting to get in here. There's a lady just at the very back there with glasses on, dark hair. Yeah.
Yes, I would just like to say for the family of Carrigan that I am very glad that this show is being aired, because I have also just come from a similar situation. On Cara's situation, I would like to say that how the judge can decide so readily on such a brief overview that we saw of a trial that she had is unbelievable. I think it was almost insensitive. I have, like I said, just come from a similar situation, and my sons and I spent a year in a domestic violence shelter while we waited for the judge in Illinois to determine our fate, whether I could return to my hometown here in Northern Ireland or whether my children had to stay in the States. So it took a very, very long time, and I'm thankful that the judge was so thorough and that he considered every aspect. But I don't even think, I feel there were so many people did not know the full ins and outs of the Hague Convention at that time.
So you would echo the comments that we've heard that perhaps lawyers give advice that they're not
Absolutely
100% sure about all of the time.
Correct.
It's very difficult. Of course. If you're a client, you have to trust the information you're given.
Correct. I was also advised at the outset that I should return to Northern Ireland.
Which, of course, was entirely the wrong advice.
Correct. It would have been illegal.
It must be difficult for you, almost reliving your own experience through Carrigan.
To the questions that the lawyers asked when Cara was on the stand, it was identical. How they tried to depict Northern Ireland, and that was very hurtful. Where we were in a very dangerous situation when we had to remain in the United States, and local authorities knew that we were living under protection because if it seemed unfair that we were subjected to a serious amount of danger, both myself and the children. Again, no home, breakdown of home, transportation, trying to find employment and to support the children and perform as a single parent in a foreign country. It was almost impossible.
Okay, thank you for sharing those experiences with us. Gentlemen, just at the end of the back row there, yeah.
I'm Jerry Cunningham, child and family psychologist working for Foyle Trust, and I was involved in the Carrigan case because I undertook to carry out an assessment. But it seems to me, I mean, it's already been touched on in many respects, that very commendable pieces of legislation can also have unintended consequences. In other words, pieces of legislation that are there to protect civil rights can actually end up having the unintended consequence of abusing civil rights. And I'm sure the Hague Convention didn't apply to the Carrigan type case. I mean, I was asked to carry out an assessment there. Now, I would have to say that my assessment was anything but complete. It was not a comprehensive assessment because of the timescale involved. And in fact, I think Cara was due to appear in court here in Northern Ireland to have the Hague Convention decision made, in the sense that she would have to return to the Florida jurisdiction. And what I was asking for was more time, because the child needed to be assessed, Cara needed to be assessed, and what was in the best interest of that child needed to be assessed. And I have to say I was absolutely appalled whenever I saw the programme earlier this week and saw the legal process at play in Florida. That doesn't mean to say the right decision, whatever the right decision might be, isn't arrived at the end. But it seems to me the process that's set up for that leaves an awful lot to be desired in many respects.
I mean, do you think that courts can often stray into territory which is simply not relevant on custody issues?
Well, I mean, I think I'm not a legal person, but in a sense, I'm quite proud of the legal system in Northern Ireland in many respects. It may leave something to be desired, but it certainly seems to me to be an awful lot better than what I witnessed in Florida. And it was that I was amazed at the amount of hearsay, for instance, that was allowed in that court. There were no witnesses who could speak authoritatively about what the state of play was in Northern Ireland, politically and otherwise. It just seemed as though people had the right to say whatever they like, to start whatever they like, and it could not be refuted by anybody in an authoritative way. I think we have a legal system here, and I wouldn't want to overstate the importance of professionals, but at least it seems to be more balanced in the sense that it does acknowledge the value of professional evidence in a court of law, as well as taking in many other factors, as it indeed should.
Okay, thank you very much. Gentleman just over on the right.
I actually stopped the abduction of my two children back to the United States by my American wife 3 years ago. And under the judicial system here, I had my children returned to me and I was given custody of them. And I'd just like to reiterate what that guy said there, that when I watched the Carrigan programme, although vastly saying that the judicial system here was good because social services were involved, and I now have my children, that the Carrigan programme seemed to just be a slanging match in court, and actually, as Susan said, there was no advocate for the children, or the child, sorry, and it just seemed to be a slanging match between the two parents. And if, say, Carrigan had no friends in America, then what would happen to her in court? With some kind of
your experience then obviously is that the Hague Convention worked in your favour. The system worked, and you have got the outcome that you would have wanted from the outset.
Sure.
Which is good from your point of view. I mean, it's an interesting twist on the gender issue as well. Does it lead you to believe that gender ought not to be an issue? It's not about mothers always being the better carers, the better parents, and fathers being second best. That's often talked about in these cases, but irrelevant in your view?
True, actually, because I found the decision by the judge here, by the court here, for a male to get custody of his two children in a matriarchal society. I was quite surprised by that.
Other lady just alongside you there?
I think it isn't so much about what's best for the father or best for the mother, but best for the child. I'm a family therapist working for Bernardo's in Newry, providing reports for the court, and the emphasis in the court is on the child, and that needs to be addressed and was missing, I think, in what we saw in the court in the States.
Which is the point that Susan made there, that there was no lawyer specifically for the child, for young Dylan in this particular case. So we've got that right, perhaps where other countries haven't, is that right?
Yes, I think there's great emphasis placed on the child and the child's interest being paramount in children's views being represented in courts here, and I think that's a very important element of the work that we do in the court.
Okay, thank you. The gentleman who's had his hand up for some time, right at the end of the very front row, yes.
I'm from the Muslim Family Association, and in the Muslim religion we believe that the child should be with the custody of his mother up to a certain age, till he reached 7 if it's a boy, and 15 or 16 when she's a girl. So in this case, the convention should really be amended, that it's not a religion-wise now, no, that where is home for the child? Where is the marriage took place? Where is they made a home? Anybody can get married here in Northern Ireland and live here 3, 4, 5 years, get a child, and then say, right, we're going home. Go home. The first day, the wife doesn't like it. She wants to go back. Then the convention here comes and say, no, you took your child away. I don't think it is right. That the right should be, the child should be with the mother till a certain age, or home where he was born, where he was used to live from the beginning.
Okay, thank you. Just we'll take one more comment from a gentleman just up at the back, and then I want to come back to Angela and Susan. Yeah.
I think, I mean, I totally believe in the Hague Convention, and in fact, I think at times that it doesn't go far enough. I think in the Carrigan case that, I mean, they haven't looked at the child thoroughly. I do believe with the panel here, but on the other hand, I do believe that Carrigan should have stayed in the country and had the case heard first and foremost, because at the end of the day, it still was abduction. Nobody has really mentioned or touched on the fact of the father's rights. Also, I mean, they could just be claims against the father, the claims of abuse. You know, I don't think the case in Florida was handled very well. I do believe that. I do believe that where the Hague Convention falls down and where our laws here fall down is that there should be financial aid to the people that are made to go back to the countries, certainly, until the case is heard properly, you know.
Okay, thank you. Just squeeze in one more. There's a lady here with a red blouse, yeah?
Yeah, I've worked for Women's Aid and have worked quite closely with Carrigan. Carrigan won when she left the country, and as it has been admitted here, lawyers don't know about the Hague Convention, so why do you expect women who are fleeing domestic abuse to know about the Hague Convention? Carrigan had no financial support, and when she was going back onto the Hague Convention, she had no financial support either to help her. We had to campaign, Women's Aid campaign, to get her a lawyer, to get her money to go back, because she had no financial support, and she'd undertakings from the court that we weren't sure were going to be upheld, because as been the case in many other cases in the Hague Convention, they're not always upheld. So Cara came home because she couldn't keep herself and her children, and she was fleeing abuse.
Okay, well, that's an allegation which has been made, which obviously the other party in that particular case have denied and have denied in court. So I don't want to pursue that any further, if you don't mind, at this stage. I want to come back to the two podium speakers here. And without being unkind to you, you're both involved in the business of teaching lawyers. Why is it that lawyers in these cases aren't aware of the subtleties and the nuances of something which is clearly important and clearly affects so many people's lives?
Well, first of all, family law is not a core law module when you're running an LLB programme, and that's a matter for the professional bodies to decide. We teach the core law modules we're required to teach by the professional bodies, and family law isn't one of them. Secondly, family law is a very, very disparate area. You might be an expert in family law and actually never have a Hague Convention case, although things are changing. So I would say, you know, blame lawyers. Certainly, I'm always in favour of blaming lawyers when they don't do a good job, and that's positive, and that's important that kind of criticism comes from their clients and that they take regard of that criticism. But don't just blame the lawyers, blame the law and change it.
Susan?
Do you want me to respond to that? Or?
Well, respond to that and respond to some of the general points that have been made by members of the audience. But pick up on that one immediately.
Particularly family law not being a core module. I remember when I started practicing law 18 years ago, family law was the field that women entered because we couldn't enter any other field of law. There was a tremendous discrimination against lawyers, female lawyers. However, I think that most lawyers who start in practice end up doing some family law cases, and they really need extensive training in this area, and the Hague Convention should be #1 on the curriculum. But I want to talk about something else, and that was the gentleman in the front and the concept of home. One of the reasons I support the Hague Convention is because I represented kids. And one of the most important things that was unfortunately, I talked to Kevin about this when he interviewed me, was unfortunately lacking from the trial. I wanted to hear from the teacher. I wanted to hear from the child's playmates. The reason that you want the jurisdiction to be home is that's where you get the evidence of which parent the child is most attached to, who's made lunch for the child, that kind of evidence. And often if you remove the child, if you take that step and move to what might have been your own home country, but your child has not been here for several years, that evidence won't come out in a court. And again, I think that concept of home is extremely important. We're talking about the best interests of children, and the jurisdiction of the court has to be where the child's home is.
So the reality, just in summing up this element of the programme, work needs to be done after 2 decades. The Hague Convention, you're both in agreement, needs to be looked at.
Changed. And people need to realise the reasons women flee, and one of those valid reasons is domestic abuse and violence, and they're not thinking straight. You wouldn't expect them to in that situation.
Is there, Susan, just finally, is there any sign that that debate is beginning to happen, that the Hague Convention is being looked at and might be refined in future?
Absolutely, all the time. I was involved in the International Bar Association Family Law Committee. There's constant meetings at The Hague to review it. They're talking about a new protocol, and I'm hoping that these kinds of events and the publicity that surrounds cases like this will bring attention to amending the Convention.
Okay, Susan Bro, Angela Hegarty, at this stage, thank you both very much indeed. I want now just to readjust our focus onto custody, or residence and contact, as the law now describes it, back here at home. Tug-of-love cases across international borders might grab the headlines, but every year thousands of couples here face similar trauma as they try to resolve their child custody disputes. Siobhan Savage reports.
1 in 3 marriages ends in divorce or separation. The Relationship Counselling Service Relate says that within 5 years, around half of divorced fathers lose contact with their children. Just as women have fought for equality in the workplace, now fathers are demanding better rights as parents. In the past few years, there's been a sharp increase in the number of fathers seeking custody and access. They are challenging the assumption that children are better off with their mothers. The court service says it acts in the best interests of children. In the vast majority of cases, children remain with their mother. Many divorced fathers are aggrieved by what they regard as limited access to their children. 6 weeks ago, hundreds of men took their protest to the streets of London, demanding a change in the legal system, which they say institutionalises discrimination against them. 36-year-old David Chicks from West Sussex tied himself to the top of a 100-foot crane on top of Tower Bridge to highlight his plight. The courts require that children's identity should be protected, yet campaigners criticise the secrecy surrounding family hearings. Many insist that the adversarial nature of court proceedings only adds to the pain of divorce and separation. Mediation projects are becoming more widespread. Is it time the law caught up with social change, and can more be done to keep the focus on the needs of the children?
Siobhan Savage reporting. Well, with me now to address some of the issues raised there are John Junk, Legal Affairs spokesperson for Families Need Fathers in Northern Ireland. He's also a second-year law student at the University of Ulster at Jordanstown. Also here is Podrigeen Drynan, who's a Belfast-based solicitor. She's been involved in family law cases and domestic violence issues for many years, acting for both women and men. You're both welcome to the programme. Podrigeen, I want to just shift the focus away from the international aspect, which the Hague Convention touches on, to the local situation. But how much crossover is there between the kind of stories we've been hearing and the difficulties we've been discussing and what happens domestically here in a great many more cases?
Domestically, very few of the cases that have all the inquiries and experts in. There are very few of those. Most cases in Northern Ireland that happen day by day are done by agreement between the parties. There are those that can't be done by agreement, and those do go to court and experts are brought in. The case that I saw, the Carragun case, is not how it would be done here. We would have outside experts, we would have people look at the situation here.
Do you have reservations, though, more broadly, as to how this whole area of family law, custody, residence, as it's now referred to, is actually dealt with in the courts in Northern Ireland?
One of the things I am very unhappy about is that under our new domestic legislation, when a father's name goes on the birth certificate, the father automatically has equal rights with the mother. Now, in the vast, vast majority of cases, the child is with the mother. The mother has all the day-to-day care of the child. The father gets access or contact from time to time, and yet when it comes to the main issues like what school the child goes to, what doctor the child goes to, whether the child can go on holiday, the man who may not have appeared for 5 years can come and say, no child of mine is going to that school, and he has equal rights with the mother in Northern Ireland, not in the rest of the United Kingdom, but here.
So that's an issue of rights and responsibilities.
It is.
And is it your view that, again, we have to generalise that, broadly speaking, custody in the majority of cases is awarded to mothers rather than fathers?
It is in the vast majority of cases on a day-to-day basis. The very vast majority, the children are with the mother. The father has contact, and the father gets the contact at a time mostly of his choosing, whereas the mother has the night time, the daytime, getting to school, all the responsibilities and all the work.
John Junk, presumably that is an issue which causes you concern.
It causes the charity and our membership a great deal of concern, because essentially if one actually looks at how the order is framed, the order says that the state, in the form of the power invested in the court through the children's order, allows the father to have contact with his own child. And I think that that's extremely offensive. I also think that the terminology is extremely offensive. I mean, terms like contact, access, I mean, they do not, for 1 second, focus on the issue, which is about parenting time. And I do take issue with Mr. Innan in the sense of it is not at a time of the father's choosing. Normal situation in Northern Ireland and in the UK is that every other weekend the father would be permitted by the state or the mother to have contact with the child.
I mean, it's your case, is it, that the court does generally take the view that the mother is the better parent to care for the child if the relationship is not continuing?
I mean, I think if we actually refer back to Carr-Gunn's case and what the Judge Angel of the Florida Circuit Court said, he said that this term, in the best interest of the children, is a hollow term. And in fact, depending on which side wins, which I think is a horrific concept. I mean, it's a very gladiatorial type concept. I think that it's an extremely hollow term, the best interest of the child, if you're on the losing side.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's particularly difficult. I don't want to go back over the territory again with the Cara-Gunn case, but the Cara-Gunn case is more complicated, of course, Padraig, because she can't stay in America for completely separate reasons. Do you want to just pick up on what John's been saying there?
I think the reality of the situation is that the children are with the mothers all the time, and I have great experience of men who may be unemployed but choose to take the children only at times that suit them, even if the mother is working. If the man could take the child while the mother was at work, he very often doesn't. The mother has all the responsibility of arranging childminding, looking after the children, taking all the responsibilities, and then the man gets contact.
So are you saying that that is the system and that you approve of that and you think that that is correct?
I would think it would be much better if a situation would be set up whereby the men would take more responsibility. Having got the rights, should take more responsibility for the children, but I think in fact they do not often enough take enough responsibility.
Is that possibly the case, John, that it may be that in your organisation there are some particularly committed men who want to father at a very high level, but perhaps there are an awful lot of men who in fact don't want to operate the way you want to operate?
I would say they're not the type of men who contact our charity, so one cannot really say with authority whether they're a statistically large portion or not. But what I can say, and certainly to support what Angela Hegarty said earlier on, you know, laws need to be reviewed in the light of changing circumstances, and undoubtedly the children's order is around 15 years old now. Things have changed. One only needs to go down to the average school and see the number of men who are there to pick children up. I mean, society is changing. Men want the hands-on role, and equally women should be supportive of that, because, you know, we've got a situation where we have, you know, dual career type situations now, and we should have a situation quite soon where there are dual carer type situations to allow both parties to enjoy a fulfilling career.
Okay, I'll come back to both of you in a moment or two, but there are quite a few people with hands up here, so I want to just take a quick smattering of comments if I can. Gentlemen, just on my right, yeah.
Hi there. Just wanted to say now there was talk about from one of the earlier panellists and all about domestic violence. I just wanted to put that in context, because we've actually, for the first time in history, we've actually done studies on domestic violence on a large scale. In fact, we've studies conducted on 107,000 people, and they show conclusively that women are at least as likely to initiate domestic violence. So that puts that kind of into...
Sorry, are you saying that the issue, the card of domestic violence, is played when on occasions it's inappropriate?
Yes, and played against the father, played against the male. In addition, that was one point I wanted to make. In addition to that, 40% of fathers in divorce cases lose all contact with their children after 2 years, which is absolutely terrible. But now, if we just look at that for a minute, now never in history have fathers left their children in any significant numbers. So what's happening now? Why is it happening now? Okay. And I put forward the hypothesis now that it's happening because judges are taking these loving fathers from their children and just not giving the men a chance. And what the lady was saying there about the fathers not wanting to be involved, that's nonsense, and there's absolutely no evidence to support that.
Okay.
None.
Well, clearly people who agree with you and people who disagree with you as well. So can I come first to the lady who has her hand up just in the second row? Yeah.
It's Margaret Gallagher. I'm a domestic violence trainer for an interagency partnership, so I train the police and social workers, whatever. I totally refute the research he's using because it's incidental research. We know the research that they're talking about, and you're talking at low levels, slapping or perhaps pushing and verbal abuse, and it's predominantly by men from that scale up. The other thing is we just ask them to count the bodies, because that's really what we're talking about here. We're sitting with a woman in the audience here beside us whose daughter was murdered, who's no grandparents' rights. Her husband has full parental rights, even though he's in prison over the children. The deceased woman has no rights at all. What I would also like to say is that as a trainer in this area, there are so many myths, and you better get your facts right, because if you look at the Home Office in Scotland, they come under such a barrage of media stuff from male victims groups around domestic violence that they actually did a big research project, and they found out that between 60 and 70% of the men who were claiming to be victims were actually perpetrators. Now, I'm not saying that. I have no problem with men who are not abusive having access to children or contact or whatever residency. But when we're talking about domestic violence, we're talking about very serious violence. We're talking about 2 women every day in Northern Ireland with a serious assault against them. We're talking about 7 murders a year here. Okay. And I would like to be given it that sort of, you need to know what you're talking about here.
Okay, well, clearly domestic violence is a very big issue, and it is a very serious issue. The concern, though, clearly in some quarters is that it is an issue which is brought up where it mightn't always be as relevant as it's suggested on occasion. Now, are you saying that that's not the case, and that it's never brought up in cases when it should be?
We know about the help-seeking process. On average, a woman is assaulted 35 times before she contacts the police. That's Home Office figures. That's not mine. We talk about Department of Health statistics. I'm using those statistics, which are the police themselves. So if you're talking about that type of over a 5-year period before a woman comes forward, I think it's very few cases where it's been overestimated or been used in the wrong context.
Okay.
The women who use our services are extremely vulnerable when they come forward, and they need a lot of support.
Okay, just a quick word from a lady in the front row who's also got her hand up. Yep.
To refute what that gentleman said, most women they do the caring and the nurturing and the rearing of the children, and if there is domestic violence, sometimes it's perpetrated towards the child as well. So, the woman has to flee with the children, and very seldom a man has to flee. He as himself might have to go.
Okay, thank you. Alan Smiley is with us at the end of the second row there. Alan.
Yes, well, I'm certainly very conscious of the fact that many people are in this situation where they have been abused. At a pastoral level, we certainly see this, and we see how children are affected by it. But I think that overall here, an overview of the situation, there's a moral issue. That in our society today, there has been a moving away from moral values, particularly the institution of marriage itself. And when people think about marriage and what it involves and what it entails, I think that there needs to be a return to those biblical values which are set forth in the scriptures. And also, when problems come within marriage, that people do seek to find out the ways of solving those particular problems.
All right, we'll maybe come on to that in a moment or two, because I know we've got some individuals with us who are involved in counselling. So I'll come to them in a second or two. Just a lady there with dark hair, second in the second row, yeah.
Hi. I'd like to speak on behalf of the children. My name's Eleanor Jordan. I'm a feminist and I work in Windsor Women's Centre in the village in South Belfast, and we would strongly welcome any men who'd like to have any role in caring of the children. I'm all for equal access and everybody having equal rights. What I'm concerned about is where the children become pawns, and suddenly either parent, in my experience, men suddenly want to be great fathers, and I don't want the children to be used. So what I would like to see is far better resources for children, far better signpointing for any resources that are available, but certainly how do children find out their rights, and how do parents learn to be positive parents even when they are separated?
Okay, thank you for that. Karen Fox is with us just in the middle there, dark suit, dark hair. Karen, you're a solicitor just in the second row from the back there. Karen, your thoughts at what we've heard so far?
Well, I think just coming back to the points raised about the children's order, what we shouldn't forget is that the courts are actually bound by the legislative provisions of the children's order. The children's order is a wonderful piece of legislation, and the reason that it is because it focuses on the needs and the interests of the child. In every single case that comes before the court is obliged to consider the particular individual circumstances of that case and the individual circumstances of that child. The court is obliged and required by Article 3 of the 1995 order to consider certain factors in each and every single case. And those factors will include things such as the wishes and feelings of the child, the physical, emotional and educational needs of the child, the effect on the child of any change in the child's circumstances, the risk of harm to the child, the capability of either parent in looking after the child. So there are a wide range of factors that the court has to consider, but it has to consider that because the underlying principle of the children's order is that the welfare of the child is a paramount consideration of the child.
And Karen, do you think that in most cases mean that the courts should award residence, or custody as it's commonly called, to the mother? Because that does seem to be what happens in the vast majority of cases, and it's what annoys a lot of men and a lot of the fathers here in the audience this evening.
I think possibly here's the point that's being missed. You can't generalise about these cases. I think each and every single case has to be looked at on its own individual facts, and the court is required to do that by virtue of the legislative provisions that are contained within the children's order.
Okay, just can I go back to Jerry Cunningham at the back there, the child psychologist. This is it just raises, I don't want to get too academic about it, but the Bowlby theory of the tender years, that this was back to the 50s when it was the accepted view, was it not, that the mother should be the preeminent carer?
Well, yes, that was a thesis that was around at that stage.
And is that still the case? Do you think it's still around?
No, I think we look more, I mean, we certainly recognise very clearly about the importance of attachments, but what we look at, and I think it's more important to look at, is who is the primary caregiver. And if there are two parents where one parent is very clearly the primary caregiver and the person with whom the child has the strongest attachment, that needs to be looked at. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what way you look at it, we still live in a society where in the main, the majority of primary caregivers are the mothers. Not always, not exclusively, and I think where that isn't the case, then I think that needs to be looked at very carefully. I think the voice of the child does get lost. Unfortunately, it gets lost whenever their parents fall out. And what we do know about us all, in a sense, is that whenever we're under a lot of stress, whenever our feelings run high, we tend to regress in terms of how we cope. And in a sense, I think we can look at adults as big children or growing up children. There's nothing magical about reaching 18 and suddenly becoming highly responsible because legally we're recognised as an adult. In a sense, what tends to happen is, with all of us, in a sense, is that if we have come through childhoods where we have not learned to cope well, that whenever we reach adulthood and encounter major stress, we regress. And what happens is that the child loses out. In a sense, being a good parent, and I think most people in this audience would agree, is doing the best for your child. What often happens, and I think it regrettably in many respects, is that doing the best for your child gets confused with who has the power in the relationship and who owns the child.
Okay. Can I just come to a lady right in the very front row who's had her hand up for some time? Yes.
I had a daughter murdered by domestic violence, and her husband is serving life, but he still has parental rights to the children. And I haven't seen the two older children in over 5 years. I got a 20 minutes this year with the youngest child. I would like to know how come a man that has committed a murder and has still rights and dictate from the prison cell to his children, and what he says goes.
And is his view backed up by the judicial system?
Well, he's given his mother and father guardian over these children, but we haven't got anywhere. I've been running to high courts. I couldn't even tell you what our oldest daughter looks like. I think it's a total disgrace. I think something should be done by the law that men that take women's lives are allowed to dictate their children on their visits.
Okay, it's a very difficult and obviously painful issue for you and for your family. Thank you for that comment. Padraig, do you want to pick up on that point and the general flow of the conversation so far? I mean, there does seem to be, I mean, I said it would be nice to avoid the whole gender war, but it does seem that there are two quite diametrically opposed views on this at the moment. Now, can we chart a middle way?
Yeah, children are obviously better with two parents, and I think that women who have the children would very much like it if men would have more contact, have more responsibility, and cooperate with the woman who is the primary carer. Give her some time, give her some help. And if men would look at what was best for the children and the primary carer, then I think things could be worked out better overall.
John, a quick word. I want to move on to mediation in a moment or two because I think that's relevant. But just your thoughts.
Just a couple of points in no particular order. When one talks about Home Office statistics and domestic violence, I believe David Blunkett said the other day that 1 in 6 men will suffer from domestic violence during their lifetime and 1 in 4 women. Clearly that is not acceptable regardless of gender. And I do have to say that it actually happens in same-sex relationships as well, so I don't think it's a totally gender-specific thing, and it's somewhat irrational on one hand for groupings to say that women can be victims of domestic violence but not perpetrators. Now, I have a great deal of sadness about this lady's case here, and I would certainly say that I would give her personally, on behalf of the charity, any help that she would want to enable her to get to see her children, because the issue here is grandparents and extended family are left out of the picture after separation and divorce, and I think that is a great shame.
Okay, we just have a couple of minutes here. Can we just leave the specific issue of domestic violence at this point, because I think we've discussed it in considerable detail, and just try and draw a few threads together here. The issue of mediation is an issue which you can talk about quite specifically. Do you think there's light at the end of the tunnel? Can it work? Can it help people who are facing apparently insurmountable difficulties?
Well, obviously it's a very difficult situation. I mean, as the judges said, it's no different for a mediator, but a mediator is working with the parents, so in trying to bring about an agreement. So you're focusing on the positives in the situation and trying to get a sharing of the parenting. So it's trying to move away from one person winning and one person losing, which I think can only be a good thing.
And presumably your experience is that there are cases where it is successful. And
yes, absolutely. There's been very gratifying results where people have come in quite implacably hostile and have moved forward and developed a cooperation because they know it's in the interest of the child.
Yeah, well, it's good for the parents, of course, but ultimately it is good for the child. And as everybody seems to agree, it's the child who should be at the heart of all of this.
Absolutely.
Lady just in the second row from the back there.
I'm also a family mediator and I'm speaking for family mediation. I would like to just echo again that the uniqueness of each situation, as the courts look at what are the needs of this particular child and children and the family. So in mediation, it is about, there are no broad generalizations. In principle, I think family mediators are in favour of a concept of shared responsibility, shared residency and shared contact. I'd also like to say that, again, echo another point that has been made, we need more money and support for these families, for the children, for the parents and for mediation.
Okay, well maybe that's a positive point at which to park our conversation. Thank you for that. Thanks to Padraig Drounan and John Junk. That's where we have to leave it for tonight. BBC Newsline will bring you the ruling in the Cara gun case just as soon as it is out. Meantime, my thanks to everyone who took part in the programme tonight. Let's Talk is back in January. Until then, have a good Christmas. Thanks for watching and good night.
If you've been affected by any of the issues raised in tonight's programme, or you'd like more information, you can ring the BBC Action Line on 0800 099 099. Calls are free and confidential, and lines are open each day from 7:30 a.m. until midnight.
Oh, what a happy time of year. The parties, the presents. If only. Not everyone is going to have as bright a Christmas. So please, pick up an extra gift while you're out to help the family appeal.
Next Saturday on The Big Read, Simon Sharma goes into battle for war and peace.
The greatest anthem to life that's ever been written.
Sandy Toksvig bigs up Little Women.
It is a wise and witty guide for anyone in the process of growing up, and I suspect that includes